Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, divorce, separation, and parenting apart. This episode is part of our new mini-series where we answer your questions and share practical bite-sized tips. I'm your host, Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online service for separating couples. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to engage your partner in a relationship ending process. And by that, I mean, what happens when one of you has gone to either amicable or a solicitor or a mediator, and you want to get your partner on board with the process of starting to unpick the relationship and starting to move forward. The first thing is really about this is that often you're in very different places. We talk about an emotional journey a lot at Amicable. And that's this idea that, you start by perhaps experiencing some quite disruptive emotions. And if you're the instigator, you might have thought about this and felt like this maybe 1 or even 2 years ago. It can be quite a long time. If your partner is hearing the news kind of for the first time, and at the same time, you're ready to move on, you can understand that there's a disconnect between where you are in the process, wanting to explore and commit to a process for sorting things out, and where they are, which is that very first sort of shock, denial, anger phase that you might have first felt, as I say, years and years ago or even months ago. So you have to tread carefully. And what we found is by talking to people is if you push hard to try and resolve things because you're ready, it usually has the opposite effect on your partner and it makes them less ready. And so rather than being able to move forward together, you get a kind of standoff situation. So how do you deal with it? And what do you say to somebody when you kind of recognize they're not necessarily in the same place as you, but still you need them to act and to move forward? So the first thing we always recommend is making sure and checking back that you've actually had the conversation that says, I'm sorry, I know this is difficult, but for me, this relationship is over and I don't want to continue. It seems such an obvious point, but you'd be surprised how many times when you really push people to say, have you had that discussion? Often it's been a thing that's been inferred or not quite said as crisp and clearly as that. And therefore, there's some ambiguity often in one or both people's minds about whether or not you've reached that final point of no return. But if you want somebody to move forward and you want them to perhaps working together to find a process that's going to help you sort things out, then you've really got to be clear that you've had that conversation and that you're both absolutely crystal clear that that conversation has happened. Now, it might not be that both of you are in the same place or that both of you want the relationship to end, but having had the conversation that says, for me at least, I'm sorry, there is no going back, this is over, that's really key. So that's the first thing. Make sure that conversation has actually happened. Secondly, it's the point I started with by just acknowledging that you're going to potentially be in different places. Sometimes relationships come to an end because they've run their course and you're both in the same place and you can see that and understand that. And usually there's both people there in that situation who want to move forward. But often it's not that simple and not that clear cut. So if one of you is lagging behind in that emotional journey because they're hearing this news for the first time, then you do need to give that person a little bit of extra space and time and put some distance between the conversation that I'm sorry, it's over and right now, what are we going to do? And all too often, those conversations can get merged and can get quite messy. So people tend to panic when they hear that it's over for the first time and start making demands or threats. And that's normal when you're upset and angry. But if you're the person who's proposing the split, the really important thing is not to respond and retaliate, but just to accept that somebody is going to be upset and angry and will say things that don't require you to escalate them by responding. So just try and absorb some of that anger and upset and accept that's part of the process. Try and stay calm, easier said than done, but also just try to put some distance between making a plan for what's going to happen next and having that conversation. So very often people say, well, I'm staying in the house, you'll have to move out. And it's very easy to turn around and say, well, why should I move out? Or, well, I can't move out because of X or Y. So if you can avoid that, having that conversation in quite that way, that will definitely help. Take the deep breaths, go for a walk, just try and let the situation calm down. And then you can go back and say, I'd like to have a conversation to sort things out. And I want to reassure you that I'm going to be as amicable as I possibly can. And I want to do what's in the best interests of our children, if you have them. But trying to then say, but let's work together to find a process that can help us work everything out, go through everything that we need to go through, make sure we haven't forgotten anything. And let's do that as a couple rather than going off to separate legal advisors. That's a really other key point of trying to keep things amicable. When one person is feeling hurt or they're feeling that the playing field isn't very level, that they're at a disadvantage, maybe financially, or they've been blindsided emotionally, it's very easy to want to go and find somebody who can protect you and protect your interests and look after you. But very often, by going to those two separate advisors, you create a divide that it makes it very difficult to come back from. So just taking some time to work out whether that is the best way or whether you could work together as a couple to sort this out is really important. And that just requires you both to walk away from the situation, to have some time to process, and then to come back at a calmer time and start to explore what you could do together. It's usual sometimes for people to have done a little bit of homework and background research. And very often we get calls at Amicable from people who just want to understand, how the land lies legally or what the options are. And we often talk to people on the telephone about what to say to your partner and how to, what we call, onboard them. So, how to give your partner information about the fact that you've contacted a service like Amicable and you want to move forward in a kind and respectful way. And you'd like them to engage or at least try and find out a little bit more about the various options and services out there before making a decision about which way to go. And so we often say, it's really important not to be enthusiastic or push a particular service, but to try and make sure that your partner feels they have a true choice in this, which obviously they do, and that they have an option to explore the different routes that you can take. So very often we'll say to people at the end of a conversation, what do you think the next steps are? How are you going to talk to your partner about this? And it's a good opportunity to just think through how your partner's likely to react if you're suggesting a service or a way of working that they haven't initially made the contact with. Because you know yourselves, when a relationship breaks down, sometimes anything that you want to do, the other person just doesn't, as a matter of course, because that's the nature of relationship breakdown. And even if you're very amicable, it can be really tough to suggest things to your partner at this point in time without them feeling that you're trying to push an agenda because it somehow advantages you or that you somehow have an ulterior motive. So we always say the best thing to do is to try and be as relaxed and non-pushy as possible. So let your partner know you've had a conversation with us. That's really important. And let them know that you've understood a bit about the service and that we've sent you an email. You can forward the email that you've received from us or another service, and you can let them see what we've said or what the other people have said about how we work our process and what the next steps are. And by doing that and just saying to them, I've had a brief chat with these people. They're a couples service. It would be nice if you would have a chat with them as well. Or what do you think about having a chat with them as well to see what you think and whether you think this process will work for us? And that way, you're just letting them know that you've spoken to us, but you're also letting them know it's their choice and they have control and volition in this situation. And that's really important because ultimately, as a couple service, our service will only work if you both want to do it. And both of you have got to come into this with an open mind, feeling committed to it and feeling that it's something, that is a neutral service that will work for both of you. So be relaxed, be gentle, suggest that your partner contacts us, and we will take it from there. We can explain the service to them. We can talk to them a little bit about how it works, where it doesn't work, which is equally important, because at the end of the day, it's important that you choose, both of you, a service that's going to work for you. And we know there are lots of different options out there, and no one service is right for everybody. And so it's important that you choose a service that you feel fits with your personal circumstances. So as you go through this journey of trying to find a way to resolve your money and your property and your issues around children and how you're going to remain amazing co-parents, think about picking a service that can focus on the human and emotional aspects as much as getting all of the legal stuff ticked off and sorted. Of course, that's important, but really this is a journey about how you transition as a family, and that's really key. So working together, thinking about the best interests of your children and ensuring their voices are heard in the process is really important. So trying to find a process that speaks to all of that is key. So if you're thinking about giving us a call, or you've already called us and you're worried about how you get your partner on board, remember that it's about making sure you've had the conversation to say it's over, having a chat with us and making sure that you've got an email from us that sets out the service we've discussed, forwarding the email to your partner and talking to your partner about their choice and their volition in this, and letting them know you've had a brief conversation with us and would they like to find out more about the service to see whether they think it's going to work for the two of you. So I hope that's useful. Finally, we'd love to know how we can help more. So please share your questions on divorce, separation and co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. You never know, they might be the topic of the next episode. Thank you for listening.